Testing 1 2. All right, just getting the microphone set up here. Bear with me just a moment. Okay, and we're live. So, doing another rundown of this week in LA, and I just wanted to go through a couple of stories, a couple of events that took place today, what I've been up to, and some other interesting things that have been happening in LA. So, I'll start today. I'll start off with what happened today, and then I'll talk about some of the thoughts I have, and even when I was personally here with some of the protesting that happened in downtown LA. So, what happened today? Well, probably the most successful meeting today was actually the Human Relations and Health Commission. I just attended at 4 o'clock. And the thing you got to understand about city commissions is that commissioners, not all of them, but the vast majority of them, they are appointed by the mayor. They do not get a high-level salary like a city council member does. And vast majority of the time, they're just regular people that want to do good by the city, and they see their involvement in a city position, which it is. It's an official sworn-in position. They see that as an avenue similar to how people join the neighborhood councils and try to make a difference there. These are usually people that live in different neighborhoods and are very in tune with their constituents, and essentially they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place because on one end, right, they're appointed by the mayor, and essentially the mayor has all their resignation letters at her desk. And so if they don't follow the narrative of what the mayor wants, then of course they risk getting kicked off the commission and not actually having a say and not being able to control and change things from the inside for the better and actually helping people. On the other end, they do have a good amount of power to actually demand different departments within the city, like the city attorney's office, for example, to generate different reports, to actually put forward statements and other inquiries so that people have access to particular records and give input into different policies that otherwise maybe the agency that is the city attorney's office, which helps counsel the city council, which also helps counsel the mayor's office in putting forward some of those strategic decisions and setting forward drafting policy. If these commissioners did not have those positions, then they would miss out on some of those potential opportunities. And so the most interesting thing too is, again, like I said, the vast majority of the commissioners, like the one I just came from, the Human Relations Commission, they're not paid, and they only meet at an infrequent time. Most of them are usually once a month. And frankly, it's sort of a similar position to be in that the neighborhood councils are, right? The neighborhood councils, the board members in and of themselves are sworn in city officials, yet predominantly, again, even though the difference with them is being elected, they're beholden really to a very particular and strict set of rules that essentially limits what they can actually do authoritatively. They're seen, in this case, the neighborhood councils are seen as more of an advisory position, but yet really they don't actually have the authority to make the city do anything. They can give dissenting opinions, they can show up and have press releases if the board agrees and it passes via consensus, but they can't really make the city do anything. They can partner with different agencies to plead that they do certain activities, but they can't actually make the city do anything. Really what I see both commissions and neighborhood councils to be is more of a congregating place that people can get together and share complaints, not just at the neighborhood level on what's going on at your neighborhood level with things like potholes and other infrastructure issues, but at a broader level, right? how your money is being spent in the city, the fact that the high-ranking city officials are not doing due diligence and are in fact fraudulently using money that has been allegedly been geared for alleviating poverty and homelessness and providing very much needed social services like mental health counseling as well as sheltering them. Yet we've seen through the Alliance federal case suing the city that both the city of LA and just more broadly speaking, the county of LA has colluded together with all of its high-ranking officials, from Matthew Szabo to Mayor Karen Bass, and even those that came before them, and colluded repeatedly to defraud the taxpayer of their money, to give favorable deals to certain developers, and to enter into deals that frankly do not benefit neither the population they're trying to serve, nor does it benefit the city at large overall. In fact, what it keeps doing, right, what it keeps happening is that money is being laundered through nonprofits. Many of these nonprofits have the various council members both in LA and other cities like Lakewood that sit as board members or some other special interest advisor or director of sorts that ultimately get a cut. Essentially a hush money, right? Essentially hush money to keep laundering money through the nonprofit, to make it legitimate, to keep stealing from the taxpayer, not disclosing in the terms of bonds how that money is supposed to be paid out, the method of payment. The grants not actually going towards programs that are alleging to provide services like shelter and housing and food and counseling. And in the times that they do in fact provide whatever modicum of alleged services, the services are subpar to say the least. I mean, we're talking about the total non-existence of services, or we're talking about people who are being placed as hotel managers for some of these hotel motel scenarios that have zero training in how to deal with diverse populations that have a plethora of needs, and the environment itself doesn't actually help capture the whole profile of people that have special needs, and it does not help put them into particular environments where they can actually get the help they need and at a pace that best suits them, where clearly, right, different populations have different needs, and the magnitude and the frequency of those needs, and that's just simply not being taken into account. Matthew Szabo himself, as well as many other deputies, testified to as such. They do zero due diligence on understanding what even brought people in front of these programs like Inside Safe to begin with in the first place. And if you don't know, and if you do zero diligence to actually understand, right, to actually understand how people even got to that situation in the first place, and you're just going to try to offer services willy-nilly that don't meet their needs, that have nothing to do with what particular situation they're in, then how could you possibly serve any of these people, right? How could you possibly ever make a lasting impression? How could you possibly ever actually claim to be helping people? How could you possibly ever make any sort of dent in alleviating homelessness and alleviating poverty and getting people off of the streets, not just temporarily, but for the long term? And some of the testimony we've seen from the Judge Carter, from the Alliance v. City of Los Angeles case that was presided over by the federal judge David O. Carter, we've seen time and time again testimony and other written records where these deputies are admitting that they're colluding with each other to not provide services. They know they're doing so. They know there's issues at the systemic level that are predominantly at hand at causing people to be homeless. And they understand that there are good practices to take into account when you are trying to keep your books straight on what services you have paid for and whether those professionals claiming to execute those services are competent at all. And they do know how to verify and check and have these balances, but they're just choosing not to. And that's you need to understand. It's not the mere act of the fraud, it's the fact that it's known and it's deliberate and it's long-standing. and particularly the lack of the prosecution of all the city officials that have enacted and engaged in this. And of course, at the helm of it all, right, who is serving as the legal counsel for the city in all these contract negotiations? Who is the one that sits at the table when a developer comes and tells the city, we want XYZ permits, we want to do XYZ things in this area, here's what we're looking to charge, here's the types of return we're looking to get? Of course, the only possible agency that could be for the city of Los Angeles is, of course, the city attorney's office. They are the legal counsel for the city. They are in all those contract negotiations, in all of those private closed session meetings. They are the body that oversees every bit of correspondence. Not a single contract, not a single discussion is had without the city attorney's office being there at the helm. And that's really the scary part in all this. I think, Herman and Wayne, myself and George do a good job many times poking fun at how ridiculous all of this is. But we got to understand that this is true criminality that we're witnessing. This is really dangerous behavior that, again, isn't really unique to just Hydee's tenure in office. This has been a long-standing thing with pretty much every city attorney. The only difference this time around is that it's coming to a peak. It has come to a peak, and people are speaking out about it. I've got several people who have shared stories that do such a great job of linking video and written records of people who are homeless, who were told repeatedly would get certain amenities like a shelter and food and other services, never got them as a result of the alliance, the roadmap agreement, and the Inside Safe programs. Yet money is constantly being thrown at these programs. Money is constantly being burned. There's no oversight or transparency to any of the spending. And in fact, some of the testimony yet again was literally such that they are not keeping a list of expenditures, basic ledgering, right? Basic ledgering and tracking of expenditures. They're just not doing so. They have poorly and or zero defined terms like what is a bed, what constitutes as a bed, what is a unit, what sort of standard pricing they're trying to go for, the basis for that pricing, the return on investment for some of these developers, and the terms and conditions for some of these master leasing agreements. I mean, it's quite literally the wild, wild west. And so that was essentially some of the public comment I gave over at the Health Commission. And I explained to them, listen, that there's people like myself who are reporting on these matters and are being prosecuted by the city attorney's office and have quite literally a target on our head for having the audacity to speak the truth, having the audacity to go against the narrative of some of these big agencies like KTLA 5 and others that don't want, or frankly don't even care to know, care to want, or even know at all what's actually going on behind the scenes with this federal case, with this homelessness fraud, with all the nonsense that the city council members of Los Angeles and all across LA County knowingly, willingly, and deliberately keep aiding and abetting the laundering and fraudulent misuse of money geared for homelessness initiatives, amongst other programs, right? I mean, it's not the only one, but it's quite a large one because it involves real estate deals, and not just of the 1 or 2 year, but it involves real estate deals over decades, right? Matthew Szabo was talking about a 55-year-long deal that they were doing where one of the things would be a guaranteed rate of investment on that property that was being given to a developer. So what's the basis for that return on investment? And how is that interest rate guaranteed? What's the equation that was used, right? What's the equation that was used to guarantee that certain percentage? And what happens if the city can't deliver that percentage in cash? What sort of in-kind payment are they going to provide to these developers? Well, the only thing that the city can do, either give up public assets like parks and other pieces of land to make up for it, or continue to take on private debt, ergo the transitioning of public assets public equity into private hands, the domination of assets at every level, right? Not just real estate, but the infrastructure like telecom, water, electric, etc. More and more coming in under the control of private equity, private hands, private special interests. And of course, all these private special interests clearly have a vested political interest in propagating the particular council members, propping up certain mayors, and shutting down other narratives that are there to out their criminal acts. Because that's what it is. It really is just that simple. And whenever people talk about, sheriff's deputy gangs or some of the criminality that the LAPD does, you got to understand that those guys are only able to get away with it because they're not being criminally charged. And, I heard somebody say people who are victims of violations of civil rights and otherwise need to also come forward and report. Well, here's the other caveat with that. When I beat my case against City Attorney Hydee Soto for a frivolous criminal charge that she came after me with, what did I do? Well, I've been going to every city and federal and state committee meeting ever. I've been giving public comment, sharing the story, and I tried actually submitting a police report over at the LAPD Central Station here in downtown LA because they have jurisdiction since Hydee works here. I went over to Central Station, and guess what happened? I talked to a detective level 3, not just a rookie beginner detective, but a level 3 detective, and I actually have his business card here that I'm going to pull up because I forget his name, but I'm going to put him out on blast. And I recorded that interaction as well, where I tried making a police report on the criminal acts of Hydee, and guess what they did, right? Guess what they did? They refused to take my police report. Just cause. Essentially, just cause they could, right? I mean, so essentially now on an internal database, that means Hydee's name is not linked to an incident ID report. That means Hydee's name is not being added to a queue to tie her to alleged crimes so that officers in law enforcement can go and investigate, meaning a detective is not assigned to it, meaning record of all the exhibits is not being created so that all of the discovery I obtained through my case is not being connected, meaning she's getting to walk away scot-free, and that's the problem here, right? So this whole nonsense that victims aren't coming forward, even when somebody is as resilient, is as tenacious, is as absolutely on top of things as I am, there's all these deliberate and intentional roadblocks that are put up along the way to force you to not, right? Literally in this case, we had Detective Quintanilla, serial number 37452, detective rank 3. You can go on Watch the Watchers and see how much he makes. This dude's making bank, and he's this moron is saying that he won't take my police report. I mean, this is kind of scumbags that you have, right? And then it doesn't end there. You have 2 other lieutenants that he deliberated with, and all came to this corrupt decision to not take my police report. They're supposed to take the police report, and that's the power that we, the people, have. That is a public complaint that we're making and filing our grievances with our government. That is a constitutional right, and they're denying me a very simple and basic constitutional right. And if they're willing to go to that extent to do this nonsense with somebody like myself, what do you think they're going to do with somebody else? So we have Lieutenant Matthews, serial number 30400, that also did the same nonsense. And then you have Lieutenant Stetter, serial number 35831, that also colluded with Quintanilla in denying me the submission of a police report. This is the real story of LA, and it's frankly quite sad and pathetic when LA Times or any other reporters aren't really covering this true story. The problem at hand is a major crisis and fraudulent and deliberate misuse and cover-up of budgets, the real budgets, and the deliberate and repeated act of denying transparency, accountability, and oversight into these budgets. Always follow the money and always understand, right? How is the money being planned out to be used, and how is it actually used? You have short goals over annual fiscal years that LA does with its planning. And when it comes to long-term budgets, they're not showing how the context of each of these budgets actually plays out, right? They're not showing the differences in similarities between how much a day rate for a bed costs and how much it should cost, and comparing it to other areas. Why is it that you have such drastically different day rates for a bed, meaning how much it would cost for somebody to be sheltered in a bed in downtown LA versus Hollywood versus any other city in LA proper? And how does that price compare to other cities like Lakewood? Well, wouldn't you know it, those prices are pretty standard across the board. You're seeing prices all the way in Lakewood that match exactly what's going on in downtown in LA. Well, how the hell could that possibly be? The two areas are so drastically different, and yet this is exactly why that's happening. This is the context to fill in those gaps as to why it's happening. It can only be one thing: criminal fraud, repeated criminal fraud, and aided and abetted by various high-level city government officials colluding to make that happen. That's how that happens. That's why you're seeing the homelessness population continue to spike, yet more and more of tax dollars are being utterly burned at the stake for these alleged homelessness alleviation and sheltering programs. You have ever-increasing rates of poverty, and you have prosecutors that have absolutely zero courage, zero guts to actually do their job. They're not honoring their oath. They're literally doing political favors. And in the case of Hydee, right, Hydee has honestly burned her entire career for the simple fact that she's running political favors for the dumbest criminals of them all, right? The dumbest criminals in Los Angeles, bar none, which is the cult of Scientology. Bar none, some of the dumbest criminals I've ever seen in my entire life, and likely, I would dare say, the dumbest criminal enterprise in LA is the Church of Scientology, the cult of Scientology, really. And that's what I caught her doing on a on an audio recording at a public meeting, where I asked her about my case, and she had gone and blabbed on exactly how she knew it was a frivolous case, how she knew Scientology did it, how she knew it was never gonna actually be prosecuted, and she did it as a political favor. Of all the things that you can use the city money on, right, of all the things that your deputies could be assigned to actually help combat real crime, this is what Hydee chooses to do with her office. This is what Hydee chooses to do with her power. And it's utterly disgusting, right? Absolutely disgusting. And this is what she does time and time and time and time and time again. This is the real face of Hydee Soto, right? The city attorney is the gang leader of LA City. Without the city attorney giving their blessing for all this other crime to happen, you cannot have criminals running amok. If they're charged, just like LAPD cops who do bad stuff are actually charged and prosecuted, you would not see as much bad behavior. Similarly, at the LAPD, I submitted complaints with Sergeant Lee Perry just here at the downtown headquarters station against 5 of the officers that were involved in my case. I still haven't received my CF numbers for the complaints on those officers. And so this is the kind of nonsense that the city of LA does, colluding with other government agencies like the LAPD to harass people over threatening bogus arrests, right? To harass people with all sorts of violence by the hands of the LAPD, sending out other and private investigators and helping other criminal enterprises like Scientology not have their harassers, aka their private investigators who target your family for daring to publicly speak out about them. They're not protecting any of the reporters. They're not protecting activists. They don't care unless you're one of their political cronies, including the commissioners, right? The commissioners are in the same position. People think that just having that city badge means that you're safe, but it really doesn't. It's actually the opposite. Having that city badge means that you and your family forever and permanent, and all your extended family members are permanently marked, right? Permanently marked. Should you ever dare say anything counter to the narrative of what the city has, of what its current officials have, you will be chased after. You will be prosecuted. They will be relentless. They will not give up. It happened to Michelle McGinnis, who literally had her job cut out from under her when she won, rightfully so, through a grueling round of interviews and over 30 years as a deputy city attorney at the city attorney's office. She won the right over other people to be the head of the criminal branch. And yet, in her time thereafter, as the head of the criminal branch, Michelle McGuinness found very clear patterns of malicious and selective prosecution by Hydee Soto of people that dared publicly criticize her political allies. And so when Michelle went public with that, what did she do? Well, Hydee fired her. She fired her, and for retaliation for being a whistleblower. And so this is who Hydee is. This is the real story of Los Angeles. This is why the city is in the current state it is, and it's the reason why the city is such a mess right now. People can say it's the current mayor, but it really isn't. Okay, it really isn't. As much as I dislike Bass, that's just not the case. It got worse, but it doesn't mean that Bass was the foundation of it all. It wasn't. I'm not excusing what Bass has done, but it's not at all the foundation, okay? And you have cowards at the city attorney's office. You have cowards at the DA's office. You have also cowards at the U.S. attorney's office, and they don't prosecute these guys. But instead of what they do is they prosecute, some of their peons like Weezar, and you catch them on, $2-3 million of fraud, and you use that as a shining example of, hey, look, we caught the bad guys, when really those are just the lackeys that they threw under the bus. That was it. They didn't capture anybody else. They didn't prosecute anybody else, and that's the problem. Time and time again, that's the problem. The testimony at the federal case in and of itself was extremely damning. Each and every one of those guys should be individually charged, and yet this is the problem, right? This is the problem that I'm talking about. And so, just because you have a set of laws written in the books that is the law, and people violate the law, it means nothing if you're never going to actually charge them with violations of the law. A law doesn't mean anything if you never enforce it. This is going to the whole etymology of what is a law. And I mean, does it really even exist at that point if there's zero enforcement of it? I would argue not. And the last thing I want to, the next thing I wanted to talk about is, so something else that happened today is there was another commission meeting with the claims board. So the claims board is the one that oversees lawsuits against the city, and they see how to handle those lawsuits. So a lot of what you'll see presented at that claims board are people that slip and fall on public sidewalks, or their cars get damaged as a result of potholes. I made my public comment there and explained all the fraudulent crap that Hydee, the city, is doing with colluding with the LAPD and Scientology. I gave them all my letters of complaint. They're officially on notice. And again, my thing here is not to try to prosecute the city. I actually think it's ridiculous to try to waste tax dollars on this, because even if you have to understand, when I do sue the city, the city is using tax dollars to defend itself. And the city of LA is already in such a bad financial state, right? Such a bad financial state. It shouldn't be that the city has to use tax dollars to defend against the criminal acts of particular corrupt city officials. It should be the case that those city officials should have to pony up the money and be dragged into court for the criminal behavior that they've done. Coming up, this week we have the LAPD police commissioner. Let's see if they cancel that last notice like they have been. Fingers crossed. So far I haven't seen that they've canceled it, so we have that to look forward to this week. But the last thing I wanted to talk about was my comments on the protests that have been going on in downtown LA, as well as all across the state. So, frankly, I don't really care which side of the political spectrum or whatever stance or ideology people have about the whole thing, on what they think about Trump or what they think about, other politicians. I really don't care, okay? What I do care is what's actually happening. And I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, after witnessing it myself, repeatedly after being there for myself, okay, what I can tell you is that while there have been some idiots, now that there's actual law enforcement present here, while there have been some idiots that have done dumb stuff, the level of idiocracy has not been anywhere near as high as it was prior to when they ever had any sort of police response. And instead, what I see is that people who are just gathering and congregating on the public right of way are getting the ever-loving crap beat out of them for not doing anything other than just simply existing on the public right of way by the LAPD. As people have come and gone towards the federal buildings like the courthouse and elsewhere, like the Roybal building, the National Guards and other military personnel that were deployed to guard those buildings were not at all concerned. I mean, I talked to them, you can see their demeanor, they're clearly not concerned. But yet, you take a look at, in stark contrast, what the LAPD is doing and their body language and their actual acts, and they're just bloodthirsty, man. All I see is LAPD constantly escalating situations that do not need to be escalated, creating situations deliberately to target activists and target just people attending. There's been people with their families in attendance here, and those families with their children are getting tear gassed over just simply showing up. And they're just tear gassing everybody left and right when there's no violence. People aren't setting cars or other property on fire. Nobody's destroying anything. While yes, there's always going to be some stupid crap like people defacing property with graffiti, that doesn't arise to the need of tear gassing kids and their parents, right? That doesn't rise to the level of beating the crap out of people with horse-mounted officers with their sticks. That doesn't arise to the level of constantly pointing your gun, right? Constantly pointing your gun at people that are just simply there. The people that are showing up as part of the members of the public are unarmed, okay? Vast majority of them, overwhelmingly, are unarmed. There's some stupid people that you can expect that anywhere, but they're unarmed, they're not violent, and they're just tear gassing and attacking everybody. LAPD is just indiscriminately harassing the crap out of everybody and just escalating every situation. I mean, it's utterly stupid, but when you think about it, it's not so stupid in that they don't know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. It's deliberate. And so, you know, when I was videotaping how LAPD was not properly sealing off different streets and instead just pressing people and then immediately relinquishing the street, it's like you either take the street or you don't, and you have to give people a chance to disperse. You can't just immediately jump from zero to physical violence. That's what I've seen time and time again. And it's at the hands of the LAPD that do it repeatedly. They aren't giving people a chance. They just immediately jump from 0 to 100. And the narrative that I keep seeing from idiots like KTLA, and I literally listen to them actually over at that street corner there, where they're pushing this narrative that people are looting and rioting and pillaging, and that's just not true. Okay, that's just not true. There's maybe a very small percentage that are being morons, that are being absolute morons, but it's not rising to what levels they're making it seem out to be. They're making it seem out to be as if all these different buildings are simultaneously on fire. That's just not true. Okay, it's really just not true. It really isn't. And so this constant fear-mongering perpetuated by organizations like KTLA, first of all, they're idiots. They're not even in most of these places to actually record. They show up long after the fact and in peaceful sections of the street, and yet they fail to cover the fact that people are getting tear gas with their kids for no reason. For no reason. Left and right. All day long. And every situation constantly being escalated by the LAPD. But they don't cover that. Right? They don't cover that. And so it makes it seem like this fear-mongering narrative that idiots like the KTLA 5 are saying is the only narrative. And it's just not true. So that's my thoughts on the protests. By and large, what I've seen ever since there was a police presence is they're peaceful, and the only people really escalating to violence are the LAPD It's totally unjustified, and it's utterly disgusting. And so I don't really care which way people have a political opinion on different politicians. I'm not really there for that. I'm here to document the fact that you have the state, the government, constantly creating false dichotomies, right? Protesters bad, government and police good, and false narratives that protesters are looting and rioting, but they're not. It's LAPD beating the crap out of people left, right, and center. I got tear gassed several times. I got pelted with less lethal. It's just ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous for doing nothing more than just being there with a camera. So that's all I got for you guys. I'm gonna see if anybody has any comments. If not, I'm gonna call it a day, and I'll go from there. All right. See you guys in the next one. Peace out.